Eleanor Winter's arms burned with strain as she clutched the edge of the auction platform, her knuckles white against the rough wooden planks. Starting bid for this fine woman, $20. Proven housekeeper, decent cook, just can't bear children. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty Montana square as Eleanor felt her soul being ripped from her body with each word that reduced her to merchandise on a sweltering June afternoon in 1878. Victoria Fairchild stood frozen on the auction platform, her honey-brown hair whipping across her face in the Montana wind. The summer of 1878 had brought nothing but heartache, and now this the ultimate betrayal. Her husband of 3 years, Edgar Fairchild, had brought her to Miles City under the pretense of starting fresh, only to sell her to the highest bidder like cattle. $20 for this fine woman, called the auctioneer, a pot-bellied man with a slick mustache and calculating eyes. A trained housekeeper, skilled with a needle, and healthy as a horse, just can't bear children. Who'll give me 20? Victoria's cheeks burned with humiliation. At 24 years old, she never imagined she would end up here, her childlessness displayed as a defect to a crowd of leering men. She avoided their gazes, instead fixing her eyes on the distant mountains that had once represented her hopes for a new beginning in the West. $25, called a voice from the crowd. Victoria flinched, still unable to believe this was happening. 3 years of marriage erased with the stroke of a pen when Edgar had filed the papers declaring her barren and without value as a wife. 30. Shouted another man, a wizened rancher whose wife had died the previous winter. The bidding continued while Victoria stood still as stone, her mind racing through memories of her life before this moment. Born in Boston to a moderately wealthy family, she had met Edgar at a social gathering when she was 20. He'd charmed her with tales of opportunity in the West, of land and fortune waiting to be claimed. They'd married quickly, her parents hesitantly blessing the union despite Edgar's modest means and ambitious plans. For the first year, they'd lived in Boston while Edgar worked and saved. When they finally made the journey west, Victoria had been filled with hope. That hope had slowly eroded as Edgar grew increasingly frustrated with her failure to conceive. No doctor could explain it. She was healthy in every other way. $40. Came another call, jolting Victoria back to the present horror. $40 going once, the auctioneer announced, his voice tinged with disappointment at the low price. Victoria was worth more as a household servant, but her known infertility had depressed her value significantly. $50, called a new voice, deep and steady. Victoria's eyes searched the crowd and found a tall man standing at the back. Unlike the others, he wasn't leering or calculating her worth with hungry eyes. He stood straight-backed, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see his steady gaze fixed on the auctioneer rather than on her body. $50 from Mr. Sullivan. Do I hear 60? The auctioneer looked around hopefully, but the crowd had grown quiet. Most of the men looking for wives wanted children. Most looking for workers could find cheaper labor. Going once. Going twice. Sold to Mr. Sullivan for $50. Victoria felt her legs go weak as the auctioneer gripped her arm and guided her down the steps to her new owner. The man Sullivan stepped forward, and she got her first clear look at him. He was taller than she'd thought, broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, met hers briefly before he turned to the auctioneer to complete the transaction. Samuel Morgan Sullivan. He introduced himself to the official recording the sale. Ranch 5 miles east of town. Victoria stood silently, her eyes fixed on the ground as papers were signed and money exchanged. She was property now, sold by the man who had vowed to love her until death parted them. Mrs. Fairchild, Mr. Sullivan addressed her directly for the first time, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I have a wagon over there. We'll be heading to the ranch shortly. She nodded mutely, following him to a well-maintained wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. He offered his hand to help her up, which she took after a moment's hesitation. His grip was firm but not crushing, calloused from work but surprisingly gentle. As they settled into the wagon, Victoria caught sight of Edgar across the square, already drinking in the saloon with the money from her sale in his pocket. The betrayal cut fresh again, and she turned away quickly, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her tears. "I expect you have questions," Mr. Sullivan said as he flicked the reins, guiding the horses out of town. "And I owe you some explanations." Victoria remained silent, unsure what to say to this stranger who now owned her. "First," he continued when she didn't respond, "I want you to know that paper doesn't mean much to me except as protection for you. I don't consider you property, Mrs. Fairchild." She turned to look at him then, searching his face for deception. "Then why purchase me at all, Mr. Sullivan?" Her voice was hoarse from hours of fighting back tears. "Because no woman deserves to be sold like a horse, especially not for something she can't control." His eyes remained on the road ahead. "I needed a housekeeper, and you needed rescue from that situation. It seemed a fair arrangement." Victoria's eyes narrowed with suspicion. In her experience, men rarely did anything without expecting something in return. "And what will be expected of me in return for this?" "Rescue." Samuel Sullivan's jaw tightened slightly. "Cooking, cleaning, tending to the house. Nothing more than would be expected of any housekeeper. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door, and I won't enter without permission." They rode in silence for several minutes, the rhythmic clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels the only sounds. "I have a small ranch," he finally continued. "It's not much compared to some, but it's growing. I raise cattle, mainly some horses. Been doing it alone for 5 years now." Victoria stared at the passing landscape, golden prairie grass swaying in the breeze, distant mountains shimmering in the afternoon heat. "And where is your wife, Mr. Sullivan? Does she approve of you bringing home another woman?" The bitterness in her voice surprised even herself. "No wife," he answered simply. "Never found the right time or the right woman." He glanced at her, then back to the road. "And it's Sam. Mr. Sullivan was my father." Victoria said nothing more, exhaustion from the emotional ordeal finally catching up with her. Her life had been uprooted completely, and she was now at the mercy of a stranger's kindness, if it was indeed kindness, and not something more sinister revealed in time. As they crested a hill, a small ranch came into view, a solidly built cabin with a barn and corral nearby. A few cattle grazed in the distance, and a small garden plot sat beside the house. It was modest but well-maintained, nothing like the grand ranch Edgar had always promised they would have someday. "It's not much," Sam said, echoing her thoughts, "but it's home." Victoria straightened her shoulders, summoning what dignity she had left. Whatever awaited her here, it had to be better than being auctioned off like livestock in a town square. "Let me show you where you'll be staying," Sam said as he helped her down from the wagon. He carried her small trunk, all Edgar had allowed her to keep, and led her to the cabin. The interior was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling, though Spartan in its furnishings. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a table with 4 chairs, and 2 doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. "That'll be your room," Sam indicated the door on the right. "Mine's across the way. Outhouse is out back. Water pump in the kitchen and another by the garden." He set her trunk down in the bedroom, a simple space with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the eastern plains. True to his word, there was a sturdy lock on the inside of the door. "I'll leave you to settle in," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Supper in an hour or so. Rest if you need it." With that, he closed the door, leaving Victoria alone for the first time since the auction. Only then did she allow the tears to come, silent sobs racking her body as she sank onto the bed. She cried for the girl who had once dreamed of love and family, for the woman who had tried desperately to fulfill her husband's desire for children, and for the bitter reality that her worth had been reduced to $50 paid by a stranger. When her tears finally subsided, Victoria stood and began unpacking her meager belongings. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she would face it with the dignity her husband had tried to strip from her. This was not the life she had chosen, but it was the life she now had. And Samuel Sullivan, with his quiet manner and unexpected kindness, was now her only ally in a world that had proven crueler than she had ever imagined. The first week at the Sullivan Ranch passed in a blur of adjustments and unspoken boundaries. Victoria rose early each morning, preparing breakfast before Sam returned from his dawn chores. They ate mostly in silence, him with the weary satisfaction of physical labor, her with the cautious vigilance of a woman in unfamiliar territory. On the 8th day, as Victoria kneaded dough for bread, Sam cleared his throat from the doorway. "I'll be heading into town for supplies," he said, hat already in hand. "Is there anything you need?" Victoria paused, flour dusting her forearms. In the days since he'd purchased her, Sam had been unfailingly polite but distant, treating her more like a fragile guest than a servant or possession. It confused her more than outright cruelty would have. "Some thread, perhaps," she answered cautiously. "The blue shirt needs mending." Sam nodded. "Write down anything else. I'll be back before sundown." After he left, Victoria continued her work with a strange sense of freedom. Alone in the cabin, she moved from room to room, taking stock of her new home with more care than she'd dared before. Sam's bedroom was as Spartan as the rest of the house, a larger bed than hers, a trunk at its foot, a rifle mounted on the wall, and a small desk with papers neatly stacked. Nothing revealing any vices or secrets. The main room held a bookshelf that surprised her with its contents, not just practical guides to ranching and animal husbandry, but volumes of poetry, history, and even a few novels. Edgar had never been one for reading, considering it a waste of valuable time. Victoria ran her fingers along the spines, pausing at a well-worn copy of Tennyson's poems. She carefully removed it from the shelf, opening to find passages marked with small scraps of paper. "In Memoriam," she read aloud, eyes scanning the familiar verses about love and loss. "My mother's favorite," Sam's voice came from the doorway, startling her so badly she nearly dropped the book. "I am sorry," Victoria stammered, hurriedly returning the volume to its place. "I didn't hear you return." "No need to apologize," Sam said, setting down a crate of supplies. "Books are meant to be read." He hesitated, then added, "My mother taught literature back east before marrying my father and coming west. She brought her books with her, said civilization wasn't civilization without poetry." It was the most personal information he'd volunteered since her arrival. Victoria nodded, uncertain how to respond to this glimpse into his past. "I got your thread," he continued, reaching into his pocket and producing several spools in different colors. "Wasn't sure which shade you needed." "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. Edgar would never have considered such details. "The medium blue will do nicely." Sam nodded, then turned to unpack the rest of the supplies. Victoria returned to her bread dough, working it with renewed vigor as she processed this small revelation about her employer's background. A mother who loved poetry explained the books, at least. That evening, as they sat eating the stew she'd prepared, Sam broke their usual silence. "Mrs. Fairchild," he began formally, "I've been thinking." Victoria tensed, fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "Here it comes," she thought. The other shoe dropping. "You've been here a week now," he continued, "and I realize I've been remiss in not making your position clearer." "My position is quite clear, Mr. Sullivan," she replied stiffly. "I was purchased to keep your house." Sam winced visibly at her words. "That's not," he sighed, setting down his spoon. "I meant to say that I'd like to pay you a proper wage for your work here." Victoria stared at him in confusion. A wage? But you already paid for me. That money went to your former husband, not to you, he said, a flash of anger crossing his features before he controlled it. You work hard, and you deserve compensation of your own. $3 a week seems fair, plus room and board. Victoria struggled to comprehend what he was offering. $3 a week was a generous wage for a housekeeper, especially with lodging and meals provided. With such money, she could save, perhaps eventually. You're giving me the means to leave, she realized aloud. Sam met her eyes steadily. I'm giving you a choice, Mrs. Fairchild. Something that was taken from you. What you do with it is your decision. Tears pricked at Victoria's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. Why? She demanded, needing to understand. Why would you do this? Because no one should be bound to a life they didn't choose, he answered simply. My father taught me that much. They finished their meal in silence, but something fundamental had shifted between them. That night, Victoria lay awake long after the lamp was extinguished, contemplating the possibility of choice that had been so unexpectedly restored to her. The next morning, Victoria rose with new purpose. If she was to be paid as a proper housekeeper, she would earn every cent. She tackled the cabin with renewed vigor, scrubbing floors that were already clean, organizing shelves that were merely dusty, and planning more elaborate meals than the simple fare they'd been eating. Sam watched her transformation with quiet amusement, but said nothing to discourage her enthusiasm. When she requested permission to expand the small kitchen garden, he not only agreed, but spent an entire afternoon helping her prepare the soil and set up a more efficient watering system from the nearby creek. As they worked side by side under the Montana sun, Victoria found herself studying Sam when he wasn't looking. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, which was rarely, but genuinely. His hands were strong and capable, moving with the confidence of a man comfortable with physical labor. Unlike Edgar, who had constantly complained about the difficulties of ranch life, Sam seemed to draw satisfaction from the work itself. You've been here 5 years, you said? Victoria asked as they took a water break in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Sam nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Came out from Pennsylvania in '73, after the war and after my parents passed. Father left me enough to buy the land and some starter stock. You've done well, Victoria observed, looking over the modest but thriving ranch. Edgar always said it was impossible to succeed out here without family money or connections. Something darkened in Sam's expression at the mention of Edgar. Some men look for excuses before they look for solutions, he said carefully. But you didn't come west for ranching, did you? What brought you to Montana originally? Victoria looked away, her fingers unconsciously tracing circles in the dirt beside her. Dreams, I suppose. Edgar painted such a picture of our future, here a fine house, prosperity, adventure. She laughed without humor. I was naive enough to believe him. Dreams aren't naive, Sam said softly. Just sometimes the people carrying them are. Their eyes met briefly before Victoria looked away, uncomfortable with the understanding she saw there. This man was still her owner on paper, regardless of his talk of wages and choices. We should finish before the heat gets worse, she said, rising to her feet and dusting off her skirt. As the days stretched into weeks, a routine developed that brought unexpected comfort to Victoria's life. Mornings began with breakfast prepared as Sam returned from early chores. Their initial awkward silences gradually gave way to quiet conversation, nothing personal, just discussions of the day's tasks, observations about the weather, or comments on news Sam brought back from his occasional trips to town. Every Saturday, Sam counted out $3 silver and placed them in Victoria's hand without ceremony. She kept the money in a small cloth pouch tucked beneath her mattress, the growing weight a tangible symbol of possibility. One evening in late July, as Victoria washed dishes after supper, Sam cleared his throat in the particular way that signaled he had something important to say. "I need to make a trip to Helena next week," he announced. "Business with the bank and the land office. I'll be gone 3 days, maybe 4. Victoria's hands stilled in the wash basin. The thought of being alone at the ranch both thrilled and terrified her. "I see," she said carefully. "Is there anything special you need me to attend to while you're away?" "Just the usual," he replied. "Feed the chickens, keep an eye on the garden. The cattle are grazing in the north pasture and should need checking." He hesitated. "Will you be all right here alone?" The question surprised her with its genuine concern. "Of course," she assured him, resuming her washing. "I'm quite capable of looking after myself." Sam nodded, but something in his expression suggested he was weighing a heavier matter. "Victoria," he said, using her given name for the first time since she'd arrived. "While I'm gone, you should know that you're free to leave if that's what you want. Your wages would more than cover the stagecoach fare to Bozeman or beyond." Victoria turned to face him fully, shocked by the directness of his statement. "Are you asking me to leave, Mr. Sullivan?" "No," he answered quickly. "No, not at all. I'm simply making it clear that the choice is yours. I won't keep you here against your will, papers or no papers." Victoria studied him, this puzzling man who had purchased her freedom only to hand it back to her piece by piece. "And if I choose to stay?" Something flickered in Sam's eyes, there and gone too quickly to interpret. "Then I'd be glad of it," he said simply. "The place runs better with you here." It wasn't quite a compliment, but Victoria felt a warm flush of pride nonetheless. "Then I'll be here when you return," she promised, turning back to her dishes before he could see the confusion on her face. That night, Victoria counted her savings by lamplight. $21 now, enough for passage to almost anywhere she might want to go. The question that kept her awake was, where would that be? Boston held nothing but painful memories and pitying looks from former friends. She had no family close enough to take her in, no skills beyond those of a homemaker. And somewhere during these quiet weeks, the Sullivan Ranch had begun to feel like a place she belonged, not as property or even as an employee, but as a person of value. The thought of leaving brought not relief, but a strange hollow ache she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Victoria tucked the money back into its hiding place and extinguished her lamp. Sam Sullivan remained a mystery in many ways, but one thing had become clear. He was a man of his word. If he said she was free to choose, then she was. And for now, at least, she chose to stay. Sam's absence left the ranch unnaturally quiet. Victoria found herself talking to the chickens just to hear a human voice, even if it was her own. By the 3rd day, she had cleaned every corner of the cabin, baked enough bread to last 2 weeks, and mended every piece of clothing that showed even the slightest wear. With nothing left to occupy her hands, her mind wandered dangerous paths. What was she doing here, playing house on a stranger's ranch? What future could she possibly have? A barren woman in a land where a woman's worth was measured by the children she could bear. On the afternoon of the 4th day, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Victoria was startled by the sound of approaching horses. Rushing to the window, relief flooded through her at the sight of Sam's wagon coming up the drive. She smoothed her hair and apron, then busied herself at the stove, unwilling to appear as though she'd been anxiously awaiting his return. The door opened, bringing with it a gust of wind and the scent of imminent rain. Sam stepped inside, looking travel-worn but pleased to be home. "You're still here," he said, the simple observation carrying a weight of unspoken meaning. "I said I would be," Victoria replied, stirring the stew she'd started earlier. "How is Helena?" "Productive." Sam hung his hat on the peg by the door and set a leather satchel on the table. "Bank business is settled, and I've secured rights to the water access on the north property line." He paused, watching her work. "Everything all right here?"
"Perfectly fine."
The garden's coming along nicely. We'll have tomatoes soon. Victoria gestured to the pot. Supper will be ready shortly. You must be hungry after your journey. Sam nodded gratefully and disappeared into his room to freshen up. When he returned, Victoria had the table set and was slicing fresh bread to accompany the stew. I brought something back, Sam said, reaching into his satchel. He produced a small paper-wrapped package and placed it on the table. For you. Victoria stared at the package in surprise. For me? Whatever for. Call it a thank you for keeping the place running so well. He gestured for her to open it. With hesitant fingers, Victoria unwrapped the paper to reveal a book, a lovely edition of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poems bound in blue cloth with gilt lettering. I noticed you looking at the poetry shelf, Sam explained, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. The bookseller in Helena said this was popular with ladies of refined taste. Victoria ran her fingers over the embossed cover, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. No one had given her a book since her father had presented her with a Bible on her 18th birthday. It's beautiful, she said softly. Thank you, Sam. Truly. He seemed relieved by her reaction, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Good. That's good. They ate supper as the first raindrops began to patter against the roof, the meal punctuated by Sam's brief accounts of Helena and Victoria's updates about the ranch. There was a comfort to their conversation now that hadn't existed before his trip, as if his absence had somehow confirmed that her presence was a choice rather than an obligation. After the dishes were washed and put away, Victoria expected Sam to retire to his room as usual, but instead, he lingered by the fireplace, stoking the flames against the chill the rain had brought. Victoria, he began, still facing the fire rather than her. There's something I need to tell you. The serious tone of his voice sent a ripple of apprehension through her. Yes. In Helena, I met with a lawyer. Sam turned to face her now, his expression grave. I had him draw up papers nullifying the sale contract from Miles City. Victoria stared at him, uncomprehending. Nullifying? Yes. Legally, you're no longer bound to me or this ranch in any way. He reached into his pocket and produced an official-looking document. You're free, Victoria. Completely free. She took the paper with trembling hands, reading the formal legal language that indeed declared her a free woman, no longer the property of Samuel Morgan Sullivan or any other man. Why? She whispered, the question encompassing so much more than just this latest act of unexpected kindness. Sam ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort with personal matters. Because it was the right thing to do, he said simply. And because. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Because I know something of what it means to be treated as property. Victoria looked up sharply from the document. What do you mean? Sam sighed heavily, sinking into a chair across from her. My mother was purchased, just as you were, not as a wife, as a slave in Virginia. My father was the son of her owner. The revelation struck Victoria speechless. She stared at Sam, seeing him with new eyes, the slight curl to his hair, the warm copper undertones to his skin that she had attributed to sun exposure. After the war, Sam continued, his voice low and measured, my father took her north, married her properly, gave her his name. He spent the rest of his life trying to make amends for the circumstances of their beginning. He taught me that freedom isn't just the absence of chains, it's the presence of choice. So when you saw me on that auction block, Victoria began, understanding dawning. I saw my mother's story repeating itself, Sam finished for her. I couldn't walk away. The crackling fire filled the silence between them as Victoria absorbed this revelation. It explained so much about Sam's behavior, his insistence on her autonomy, his careful distance. Thank you for telling me, she finally said. And for this. She held up the document. Though I'm not sure what difference it makes in practical terms. I still have nowhere else to go. It makes all the difference in the world, Sam insisted. Now if you stay, it's because you choose to, not because a piece of paper says you must. He stood, suddenly awkward again. And I hope you will choose to stay, Victoria. As my housekeeper, my employee, whatever terms suit you best. With that, he bid her good night and retreated to his room, leaving Victoria by the fire with her newfound freedom and the complicated emotions it stirred. The next morning brought clear skies and a subtle shift in the atmosphere between them. Victoria moved about the kitchen with a new awareness of herself as a free woman making choices rather than following orders. When Sam asked if she might bake an apple pie for Sunday dinner, she agreed not out of obligation but because she wanted to please him, a realization that both confused and excited her. As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch's rhythms changed with the season. Sam spent longer days in the fields, preparing for winter, while Victoria preserved garden produce and made the cabin ready for colder weather. Their evening conversations grew longer, ranging beyond the practical matters of the ranch to books they had read, places they had seen, and carefully edited versions of their pasts. Victoria learned that Sam had fought for the Union in the final year of the war, despite being only 17 when he enlisted. He spoke little of the conflict itself, focusing instead on the beauty of the Shenandoah Valley and the kindness of a Virginia schoolteacher who had given him books during his convalescence after a minor wound. In turn, Victoria shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's shipping business, and her mother's determination that her daughter would be educated beyond what was typical for young ladies. She spoke of her love of music and how she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher herself before marriage to Edgar had redirected her path. Neither of them spoke directly of the auction in Miles City or the circumstances that had brought her there. It hung between them like a curtain neither was ready to draw aside. One crisp October morning, as Victoria pinned laundry to the line, the sound of approaching horses drew her attention to the road. A wagon she didn't recognize was coming toward the ranch, driven by a woman with a young boy beside her. Sam emerged from the barn, alerted by the same noise, and Victoria saw his face break into a rare, genuine smile. "Margaret," he called, striding toward the approaching wagon. "This is a surprise." The woman Margaret reined in her horses and returned his smile warmly. "Sam Sullivan. Don't tell me you forgot? You promised Tommy you'd help him pick his first horse when he turned 10. The boy beside her, Tommy, Victoria presumed, practically bounced with excitement. "You said you had the perfect pony for me, Uncle Sam. Is he still here?" "Uncle Sam," Victoria murmured to herself, watching as Sam lifted the boy down from the wagon with easy familiarity. "I didn't forget," Sam assured the child, ruffling his hair. "That spotted gelding is waiting just for you. Let's get your moss settled first, though." Only then did Sam seem to remember Victoria's presence. He turned, gesturing for her to join them. "Margaret, Tommy, this is Victoria Fairchild, my—" He hesitated fractionally. "Housekeeper. Victoria, this is Margaret Wilson and her son Tommy. Margaret's husband Daniel was my closest friend in the war. They ranch about 15 miles west of here." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Fairchild," Margaret said warmly, though Victoria didn't miss the curious assessment in the woman's eyes. Sam's never mentioned a housekeeper before. "It's a recent arrangement," Victoria explained, smoothing her apron self-consciously. "How nice to meet friends of Sam's." "More like family," Margaret corrected with an easy smile. "Daniel would have been lost without Sam during the war, and we've been looking after each other ever since." She climbed down from the wagon, revealing a noticeably pregnant state. "I hope we're not imposing. We plan to stay the night, if that's all right." "Of course it is," Sam assured her before Victoria could respond. "Victoria makes the finest apple pie in the territory. We'd be honored to have you." Tommy was already tugging at Sam's sleeve. "Can we see the pony now? Please, Uncle Sam?" Sam laughed, a full, unguarded sound that Victoria realized she had never heard from him before. "All right, young man. Let's go meet your new friend while the ladies get acquainted. As Sam led the excited boy toward the corral, Margaret turned to Victoria with a friendly but assessing gaze. So, Mrs. Fairchild, how long have you been working for our Sam? Since July, Victoria answered, leading the way to the cabin. And please call me Victoria. Only if you call me Margaret, the other woman replied, following her inside. My goodness, the place looks different. Last time I was here, Sam was living like a true bachelor. Now it actually resembles a home. Victoria felt an unexpected surge of pride at the compliment. Would you like some coffee? The journey must have been tiring in your condition. Coffee would be heavenly, Margaret agreed, easing herself into a chair at the kitchen table. As Victoria busied herself with the preparations, she could feel Margaret's eyes on her. If you don't mind my asking, Victoria, how did you come to work for Sam? He's always been so private, especially with women. Victoria tensed, uncertain how to answer. The truth was too humiliating to share with a stranger, but she was a poor liar. It was an unusual circumstance, she said carefully. I found myself in need of a position, and Sam was kind enough to offer one. Margaret's expression suggested she knew there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Well, I'm glad he's not rattling around this big place alone anymore. Daniel and I have worried about him, living so isolated out here. He seems quite capable of managing on his own, Victoria observed, setting a cup of coffee before her guest. Capable, yes. Happy? That's another matter. Margaret sipped her coffee appreciatively. Sam's a good man, one of the best I've ever known. But he carries more burdens than most, and he's too stubborn to share them. Victoria's curiosity was piqued despite herself. What sort of burdens? Margaret studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Has he told you anything about his parents? Some, Victoria admitted. About his mother's background and his father's beliefs. Margaret nodded. Then you know more than most. Sam doesn't talk about that with many people. She leaned forward slightly. What he probably didn't tell you is that his parents' marriage was never fully accepted, even in Pennsylvania. Sam grew up between worlds, not fully welcome in either. Victoria thought of Sam's careful reserve, his emphasis on choice and freedom. How much of that had been shaped by a childhood of conditional acceptance? The war changed him, Margaret continued. Changed all of us, I suppose. Daniel came home with a limp and nightmares. Sam came home with a determination to build something entirely his, a place where he made the rules. She smiled sadly. But a ranch is a lonely kingdom for one. Before Victoria could respond, the door burst open and Tommy rushed in, face flushed with excitement.
Ma.
The pony's perfect. Uncle Sam says I can name him whatever I want, and he's teaching me to saddle him all by myself. Sam followed at a more sedate pace, an indulgent smile softening his features. He's a natural horseman, Margaret. Daniel will be proud. The conversation shifted to the boys' new pony and plans for their return journey the next day. Victoria busied herself preparing a special dinner for their guests, her mind churning with Margaret's revelations about Sam's past. That evening, after a meal filled with laughter and stories Victoria had never heard Sam tell, she found herself watching him interact with Tommy, patient, kind, attentive in a way that suggested he would have made an excellent father. The thought brought a surprising pang of something like regret. After Tommy had been tucked into a makeshift bed in the main room and Margaret had retired to Victoria's room, Victoria would sleep on a pallet by the fire. Sam stepped outside onto the porch. Victoria followed, drawn by an impulse she didn't quite understand. They're wonderful, she said softly, coming to stand beside him in the cool autumn night. Margaret and Tommy. Sam nodded, his gaze on the star-filled sky. The best of people. Daniel too, he's in Bozeman on business, or he'd have come along. Tommy adores you, Victoria observed. You're good with him. A wistful smile crossed Sam's face. He makes it easy. Smart boy, eager to learn. They stood in companionable silence for a moment. The vast Montana night spread out before them like a velvet blanket studded with diamonds. Margaret told me a little about your childhood, Victoria finally said. It couldn't have been easy. Sam tensed slightly beside her. Margaret talks too much sometimes. She cares about you, Victoria countered gently. As does her family. They're good people, Sam repeated, his voice softer now. Accepted me without question when others wouldn't. Victoria gathered her courage. Is that why you've never married? Because you feared others wouldn't accept your choice. Sam turned to look at her then, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Partly, he admitted. And partly because I've never met a woman who seemed willing to share the particular complications of my life. He paused. Until recently, perhaps. Victoria's heart quickened at the implication, but before she could respond, Sam straightened and stepped back slightly. It's getting cold. We should go in, he said, the moment broken. That night, lying on her pallet before the dying fire, Victoria found herself unable to sleep. Sam's words echoed in her mind, until recently, perhaps, along with the memory of his expression when he'd said them. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that Sam's interest in her might extend beyond kindness or obligation. And more unsettling still, she confronted the growing certainty that she wanted it too. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the ranch in white before November's end. Victoria stood at the window, watching Sam lead the horses into the barn as fat flakes swirled around him. The past weeks since Margaret and Tommy's visit had brought subtle changes to her relationship, with Sam longer conversations by the fire, his hand occasionally brushing hers when passing dishes at dinner, shared smiles over small daily triumphs. Nothing had been spoken aloud, but Victoria felt the shift like the changing of seasons, gradual yet inexorable, bringing both anticipation and fear. Fear, because she knew her fundamental flaw remained. Whatever might grow between them, she could never give Sam children. The thought created a constant ache beneath her growing affection for him. The cabin door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and a snow-dusted Sam. It's coming down harder, he announced, stamping his boots. Might be the first big storm of the season. Victoria handed him a cup of hot coffee. The animals are secure? Safe and warm, he confirmed, gratefully accepting the drink. Their fingers touched in the exchange, lingering a moment longer than necessary. Looks like we might be housebound for a day or two. The prospect of being snowbound together sent a flutter of nervous excitement through Victoria. I've plenty of baking to do, she said, turning back to the stove to hide her flushed cheeks. And those shirts of yours won't mend themselves. Sam settled into his chair by the fire, watching her with a contemplative expression. You know, when I was in Helena, I heard about a teaching position opening at the school there come spring. Victoria paused in her work, surprised by the sudden change in topic. Oh, they're looking for someone with Eastern education refinement. Pays well $30 a month plus lodging. His voice was carefully neutral. I thought of you immediately. Victoria turned to face him, flour-dusted hands resting on her apron. You want me to leave? No, Sam said quickly, then more measured. No, I don't want you to leave. But I want you to know all your options. He met her eyes steadily. You're educated, Victoria. Capable of more than keeping house for a cattle rancher. The implication of his words warmed her even as they confused her. Was he testing her? Offering her an honorable exit before whatever was growing between them progressed further? I appreciate you thinking of me, she said carefully, but I'm content with my position here. Something like relief flickered in Sam's eyes, though his expression remained composed. The choice is yours. Always. The storm intensified as evening approached, wind howling around the cabin's sturdy walls and snow piling against the windows. After supper, instead of retiring to his room as usual, Sam brought out a battered checkerboard. "My father taught me to play when I was Tommy's age," he explained, setting up the pieces. Said it taught patience and strategy, both useful for a man with limited options. Victoria accepted the invitation, settling across from him at the table. "My father preferred chess, but I was a dreadful player. Perhaps I'll fare better at checkers." They played by lamplight as the storm raged outside, the simple game extending into hours of conversation. Sam spoke more openly than ever before about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his mother's quiet strength and his father's principled stands that often cost the family socially and financially. He believed things would change after the war, Sam recalled, moving a checker thoughtfully, that the country would finally live up to its founding promises. He didn't live to see how little actually changed. "But some things did change," Victoria offered. "Your mother was free, you fought for the Union, attended school." "Progress measured in inches when it should be measured in miles," Sam replied, but without bitterness. Still, he wouldn't have lost faith. That wasn't his nature. "And you?" Victoria asked softly. "Have you lost faith?" Sam looked up from the board, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "Not in everything," he said quietly. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Victoria's heart raced as Sam's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. The moment was broken by a particularly violent gust of wind that rattled the windows, making them both jump slightly. "We should probably turn in," Sam said, his voice rougher than usual. "Storm's not letting up." Victoria nodded, rising from the table with a mixture of disappointment and relief. Whatever was happening between them, she wasn't sure she was ready for it to progress further, not with so many unspoken truths still hanging between them. The storm lasted 3 days, keeping them confined to the cabin except for Sam's brief excursions to tend the animals. They fell into a peaceful rhythm, reading aloud to each other from Sam's collection of books, preparing meals together, playing checkers. Victoria improved enough to win occasionally, and talking about everything except the growing attraction neither of them quite acknowledged. On the afternoon the skies finally cleared, Sam announced he needed to check the cattle in the north pasture. "I won't be back until after dark," he warned, bundling up against the cold. "Don't worry if I'm late." "Be careful," Victoria urged, handing him a packet of food she'd prepared. "The drifts look deep." He smiled, tucking the package into his coat. "I've weathered worse. Keep the fire strong." After he left, Victoria took advantage of the solitude to give the cabin a thorough cleaning. As she swept beneath Sam's bed, her broom dislodged a small wooden box she hadn't noticed during her previous cleanings. She hesitated, torn between respect for Sam's privacy and burning curiosity. The box wasn't locked, sitting partially open where her broom had disturbed it. Before she could reconsider, Victoria knelt and carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of carefully preserved mementos, a faded daguerreotype of a handsome black woman and a stern-looking white man standing formally side by side, military insignia from the Union Army, a pressed flower between tissue paper, several letters tied with faded ribbon, and at the bottom, a folded newspaper clipping. Victoria's conscience pricked as she unfolded the yellowed paper, but something compelled her to continue. It was an article from a Miles City newspaper dated just 2 days before the auction where Sam had purchased her. "Local rancher found dead," the headline proclaimed. Victoria's eyes widened as she read the brief account of how a man named James Holcomb had been found shot to death near his property line. Authorities suspected robbery, though nothing appeared to have been taken. The article mentioned that Holcomb had recently won a significant sum in a poker game at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Victoria stared at the clipping, trying to understand its significance and why Sam would have kept it. The name Holcomb meant nothing to her, and she couldn't see any connection to Sam or herself. With a guilty start, she carefully refolded the article and returned everything to the box exactly as she had found it, sliding it back under the bed. Whatever secrets the box contained, they weren't hers to uncover. Sam returned after nightfall as predicted, bringing with him the sharp scent of winter and news that the cattle had weathered the storm with no losses. He seemed in unusually good spirits, even suggesting they celebrate with a bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. As they sat before the fire with small glasses of the amber liquid, Victoria found herself studying Sam's face in the firelight, searching for clues to the man whose private mementos she had glimpsed. "Is something wrong?" Sam asked, noticing her scrutiny. Victoria shook her head quickly. "No, not at all. I was just thinking." She hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "About how little I actually know about you, despite living under your roof for months now." Sam swirled the whiskey in his glass thoughtfully. "What would you like to know?" "Everything," she thought. "Why you kept that newspaper article. Why you really bought me. Whether what I'm feeling for you is something you share." Instead, she asked, "Have you always wanted to be a rancher?" Sam's expression softened with memory. "Not always. As a boy, I wanted to be a lawyer like my father, fighting wrongs with words instead of weapons." He took a small sip of whiskey. "The war changed that. After seeing so much death, I wanted to create life, instead raise cattle, grow things, build something lasting." "You've done that," Victoria observed. "This ranch is thriving because of your care." "It's getting there," Sam agreed. "Another few years, and it will be what I envisioned." He paused, looking into the fire. "Though I always imagined a family to share it with someday." Victoria's heart constricted painfully. Here it was the conversation she had both longed for and dreaded. "Children running around the yard?" she asked, her voice carefully steady. "Perhaps," Sam said, his eyes finding hers. "But first, a partner. Someone to build with, not just for." The intensity of his gaze made Victoria's breath catch. "And you haven't found that person in 5 years here?" "I wasn't looking," Sam admitted quietly. "Until recently." Victoria set down her barely touched whiskey, her hands suddenly unsteady. "Sam, there's something you should know. Something I should have told you directly, though I'm sure you heard it at the auction." Sam tensed, waiting. "I can't have children," Victoria forced herself to say, the words bitter in her mouth. "I tried for 3 years with Edgar. Saw doctors. Prayed. Nothing worked. That's why he sold me, because I couldn't give him sons." Her voice broke slightly. "Whatever might be growing between us, you should understand that limitation." Sam's expression changed from tension to something like anger, though Victoria realized quickly it wasn't directed at her. "Edgar Fairchild was a fool," he said, his voice low and fierce. "And a cruel one at that." Nevertheless, Victoria persisted, needing him to understand the full implications. "I'm barren." "If you want a family, Victoria," Sam interrupted, setting down his glass and leaning forward. "Do you think I didn't know what I was doing when I bid for you that day?" "The auctioneer made your situation quite clear to everyone present." "Then why?" she whispered. "Why would you want? Because a woman's worth isn't measured by her ability to bear children," Sam said firmly. "My mother taught me that. My father lived it. A marriage, a partnership, is about much more than creating offspring." Victoria stared at him, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. Every assumption she had made about her value as a woman had been shaped by Edgar's disappointment, by society's expectations, by her own sense of failure. "But you said you wanted a family," she reminded him. "Family comes in many forms," Sam replied. "Daniel and Margaret and Tommy are family to me, though we share no blood." He reached across the space between them, tentatively taking her hand. "Victoria, I don't know what the future holds for either of us. But I do know that these past months with you here have been the happiest of my life on this ranch." Tears filled Victoria's eyes at his words and the gentle pressure of his calloused hand on hers. "Mine too," she admitted softly. Sam's thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. Then perhaps we should consider what that might mean for both of us. Before Victoria could respond, a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They jumped apart like guilty children as Sam rose to answer it, his expression changing from tender to alert in an instant. On the porch stood a snow-covered man Victoria had never seen before, his horse steaming in the cold behind him. "Sullivan," the man nodded grimly. "Sorry to disturb you, but there's trouble." Ryder came through from Miles City with news. "Edgar Fairchild's been shot dead in the Silver Dollar Saloon. They're saying you might know something about it." Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sam's face had gone completely blank, a mask that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Better come in, Sheriff," he said, stepping aside to allow the man entry. "Seems we have matters to discuss." The sheriff, a weathered man named Harlow with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner, stamped snow from his boots before entering the cabin. His gaze immediately fell on Victoria, assessment in his expression. "Mrs. Fairchild, I presume," he said with a respectful nod. "I'm sorry to bring such news." Victoria stood frozen, unable to process the sheriff's words fully. Edgar dead? Shot in a saloon? And somehow connected to Sam? "When did this happen?" Sam asked, his voice carefully controlled as he gestured the sheriff toward a chair. "2 nights ago," Harlow replied, accepting the seat but declining Sam's offer of coffee. "Fairchild was playing cards, got into an argument with a stranger. Witnesses say it turned ugly fast. Stranger shot him, then disappeared." He fixed Sam with a steady look. "Thing is, before he died, Fairchild apparently said something about you, Sullivan. Said you'd finally sent someone to finish the job." Victoria's eyes darted to Sam, whose expression revealed nothing beyond appropriate concern. "Sheriff, I've been here at the ranch for the past week. The storm kept everyone homebound for days. Mrs. Fairchild can confirm that." "I don't doubt it," Harlow said, still studying Sam carefully. "But a man can hire things done." "I had no reason to wish Edgar Fairchild harm," Sam stated flatly. The sheriff's gaze shifted to Victoria. "With respect, madam, word gets around even in territories this spread out. Most folks know Sullivan here bought you at auction after your husband sold you off. Some might consider that motive enough." Victoria found her voice at last. "Sheriff Harlow, Mr. Sullivan purchased me as a housekeeper, nothing more. He has shown me only kindness and respect." She lifted her chin slightly. "As for my former husband, I had no contact with him since our separation." Harlow nodded, seeming to accept her statement at face value. "I believe you, madam. But there's still the matter of Fairchild's accusation." "Dying men say many things, Sheriff," Sam observed. "Not all of them true." "Indeed they do," Harlow agreed, rising from his chair. "Still, I'd appreciate it if you'd come into town when the weather permits, Sullivan. Just to make a formal statement." "Of course," Sam agreed. First clear day. After seeing the sheriff out, Sam returned to find Victoria still standing where he'd left her, her face pale with shock. "Victoria," he began, but she cut him off. "Did you do it?" she asked directly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you have Edgar killed?" Sam's expression hardened. "No," he said firmly. "I did not arrange Edgar Fairchild's death." Victoria searched his face, looking for any sign of deception. "Then why did he accuse you? And why—" She stopped abruptly, the newspaper clipping she'd found suddenly taking on new significance. "The article under your bed. About a man named Holcomb being shot. Was that connected to Edgar somehow?" Sam's eyes widened slightly, confirming her suspicion before he could deny it. "You went through my things," he said, his voice flat with disappointment. "Not intentionally," Victoria defended, though guilt colored her tone. "I was cleaning and found the box. I shouldn't have looked, I know that, but I did." She took a step toward him. "Please, Sam. I need to understand what's happening." Sam moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames as if seeking answers there. For a long moment, Victoria thought he might refuse to explain, but finally, he spoke. James Holcomb was Edgar Fairchild's partner in a land fraud scheme, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. They'd been working the territory for over a year, selling the same parcels of land to multiple buyers, then disappearing before the buyers discovered the deception. Victoria sank into a chair, struggling to reconcile this information with the man she had married. Edgar had always been ambitious, sometimes cutting corners in business, but outright fraud? How do you know this? She asked. Because my father was one of their victims in Pennsylvania, Sam replied, turning to face her. He invested nearly everything we had in what was supposed to be prime timberland. By the time he discovered the fraud, Holcomb and Fairchild, though he used a different name then, had vanished west. His jaw tightened with old anger. The stress of it contributed to my father's heart failure 6 months later. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. So, when you saw me on that auction block, I recognized the name Fairchild from my investigations, Sam confirmed. I'd been tracking him for years, trying to bring him to justice for what he did to my family and others. I came to Montana because rumors placed him here. You bought me to get to Edgar, Victoria realized, a cold wave of disappointment washing through her. All of this, the kindness, the freedom, the wages, it was just part of your revenge plan. No, Sam insisted, crossing to kneel before her chair. Victoria, look at me. He waited until she raised her eyes to his. Yes, I recognized Fairchild's name that day. Yes, I wanted justice for what he'd done. But when I saw you standing there, being sold like property, he shook his head, emotion making his voice rough. I couldn't walk away. Not from that. My reasons for helping you were never false, never part of some scheme. Victoria wanted desperately to believe him, but doubt had crept in where trust had begun to grow. Did you confront him? After you bought me? Sam hesitated, then nodded once. The night after the auction. I went to the saloon where he was celebrating his windfall from selling you. I told him who I was, what I knew about his operations. Said I had evidence I was taking to the authorities. And he laughed, Sam recalled, rising to pace the room. Said no one would believe the word of a man like me against a respectable businessman like himself. Said he'd paid off enough officials to ensure any charges would disappear. His hands clenched into fists at the memory. Then he had the gall to ask if I was enjoying my purchase, meaning you, and suggested I'd overpaid for damaged goods. Victoria flinched at the crude assessment, all too aware that Edgar would indeed have spoken of her in such terms. I wanted to kill him, Sam admitted quietly. I won't pretend otherwise. But I didn't. I walked away because I knew violence wouldn't bring real justice. My father taught me that much. He stopped pacing to look at her directly. 2 days later, Holcomb was found dead. I kept the article because I suspected Fairchild might have killed his partner to eliminate loose ends. And now Edgar is dead too, Victoria murmured, in a similar manner. It seems so, Sam agreed. But I had nothing to do with either death, Victoria. You have to believe that. Victoria studied the man before her, this complex, principled person who had saved her from degradation, only to reveal that their meeting had never been the coincidence she'd believed. I want to believe you, she said honestly. But you've kept so much from me, Sam. How can I trust what you say now? Pain flashed across his features. I should have told you sooner, I know that. I was afraid. He trailed off, looking away. Afraid of what?
Victoria Prest.
Afraid you would look at me exactly as you're looking at me now, he answered, his voice barely audible. Like you're seeing a stranger instead of the man who's come to care for you more than I thought possible. The raw honesty in his words touched something deep within Victoria. Despite her confusion and hurt, she couldn't deny the genuine emotion she saw in Sam's eyes or the answering feeling in her own heart. I need time, she said finally. Time to think about all this. Sam nodded, accepting her decision with the same respect he'd shown since the beginning. Take all the time you need. I'll ride into town tomorrow to speak with the sheriff. Clear this matter up. That night, Victoria lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, turning over everything she had learned. Her marriage to Edgar had been built on his lies and her naivete. Had she fallen into the same pattern with Sam? Or was what they'd begun to build together genuine despite its complicated foundations? By morning, Victoria had reached no clear conclusions, but she knew one thing with certainty. She needed to face this situation directly rather than hiding from uncomfortable truths as she had done too often in the past. When Sam prepared to leave for town, Victoria was ready beside him, dressed for travel. I'm coming with you, she announced, brooking no argument. Edgar was my husband. I should be there to hear whatever the sheriff has learned. Sam looked as though he might protest, but instead nodded his agreement. It's a difficult ride in this weather. I'm stronger than I look, Victoria replied, buttoning her heaviest coat. The journey to Miles City took most of the day, the snow-covered trails slowing their progress. They spoke little, each lost in private thoughts as the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves. Victoria had not returned to the town since the day of the auction, and as its buildings came into view, a knot of anxiety formed in her stomach. Somewhere in that cluster of structures, her life had been reduced to a monetary value and sold to the highest bidder. Somewhere there, Edgar had taken that money and spent it on drink and cards before meeting his violent end. We don't have to stay long, Sam said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. Just long enough to speak with the sheriff. The town was busier than Victoria remembered, the main street filled with cowboys, shoppers, and wagons despite the cold. As they rode toward the sheriff's office, she felt eyes turning in their direction, whispers following in their wake. News traveled fast in small towns. No doubt everyone knew of Edgar's death and Sam's summoning. Sheriff Harlow was at his desk when they arrived, looking unsurprised to see Victoria accompanying Sam. Mrs. Fairchild Sullivan, he greeted them, rising to offer Victoria the only chair besides his own. Appreciate you coming in this weather. We want to resolve this matter quickly, Sam stated, remaining standing. I had nothing to do with Edgar Fairchild's death, directly or indirectly. Harlow studied him thoughtfully. So you say. And yet Fairchild seemed mighty convinced you were behind his troubles. Edgar was a fraud and a liar, Victoria interjected, surprising both men with her vehemence. If he accused Mr. Sullivan, it was likely to deflect from his own misdeeds. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. Strong words about your husband, madam. Former husband, Victoria corrected. And I've had months to reflect on the true nature of our marriage. Edgar was not the man I thought I'd married. Harlow nodded slowly. Well, as it happens, new information has come to light that supports your assessment. He shuffled through papers on his desk, extracting a telegram. This came in from Denver yesterday. Seems your former husband was wanted for questioning there regarding land fraud and possibly murder. Denver authorities have been tracking him for some time. Sam and Victoria exchanged glances, this confirmation of Edgar's criminal activities settling between them. Furthermore, Harlow continued, witnesses at the Silver Dollar now recall that the stranger Fairchild argued with accused him of cheating at cards and mentioned something about Denver. Seems more likely this was connected to Fairchild's past catching up with him rather than any action on your part, Sullivan. Relief washed over Victoria so strongly she nearly sagged in her chair. Sam's expression remained carefully neutral, but she noticed his shoulders relax infinitesimally. Does that mean Mr. Sullivan is no longer a suspect? Victoria asked directly. Let's say he's no longer my primary concern, Harlow answered diplomatically. Though I'd still like to know why Fairchild mentioned you specifically, Sullivan. Sam hesitated only briefly before explaining about his father's losses and his long search for the men responsible. The sheriff listened attentively, occasionally making notes. So you confronted him after the auction, Harlow summarized when Sam finished. But didn't take further action. That's correct, Sam confirmed. I plan to gather more evidence and present it to authorities in Denver, where the larger frauds occurred. Harlow nodded thoughtfully. Well, someone saved you the trouble, it seems. Denver's sending a man to investigate, but given what we know now, I'm inclined to believe this was the work of someone from Fairchild's Denver operations, not local business. After a few more questions and the formality of signing statements, they were free to go. Outside the sheriff's office, Victoria breathed deeply of the cold air, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. We should find rooms for the night, Sam suggested, looking at the darkening sky. Too late to start back now. Victoria nodded her agreement, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. The emotional strain of the past 24 hours had drained her completely. They secured rooms at a small hotel on the quieter end of town's separate rooms, though adjoining. After a simple meal in the hotel's dining room, where they were the subject of poorly concealed, curious glances, Victoria retreated to her room with a promise to meet Sam for breakfast before their return journey. Alone at last, she sank onto the bed, her mind replaying the revelations of the day. Edgar had been even worse than she believed, not just a cruel husband who discarded her when she failed to conceive, but a criminal who had defrauded countless people, possibly even committed murder. And Sam. Sam had not been entirely truthful about how he came to purchase her, but neither had his kindness been a lie. He had recognized Edgar's name, yes, but his decision to bid for her, to give her freedom and dignity that had come from the core of who he was, the values his parents had instilled in him. A soft knock at the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. Victoria? Sam's voice came through the wood. May I speak with you briefly? She rose and opened the door to find him standing awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hands, looking as uncertain as she'd ever seen him. I owe you a complete explanation, he said without preamble, and an apology for not being fully honest from the beginning. Victoria stepped back, allowing him to enter.
I'm listening.
Sam remained near the door, maintaining a respectful distance. I came to Montana tracking rumors of Fairchild's operation. When I saw the auction notice with his name, I went out of curiosity to confirm it was the same man. I had no intention of participating. His eyes met hers, earnest and direct. But then I saw you standing there, being sold like property, and everything changed. I didn't bid on you as part of some revenge scheme against Edgar, Victoria. I bid because I couldn't bear to see you purchased by any of the men in that crowd. Why didn't you tell me this before? Victoria asked, needing to understand. All these months, why keep it secret? At first, because I thought it would only add to your trauma knowing your husband wasn't just cruel but criminal, Sam explained. Later, because I was afraid of losing your trust, your regard. He shook his head ruefully. I see now that keeping the truth from you risked exactly what I feared most. Victoria studied him in the soft lamplight of the hotel room. This man who had rescued her, respected her, and gradually won her heart despite both their pasts. What happens now? She asked softly. With Edgar gone, I'm truly free. The papers you had drawn up in Helena combined with his death mean I'm no longer bound to anyone, by law or otherwise. That's right, Sam agreed, his expression carefully neutral, though she could see hope and fear warring in his eyes. You can go anywhere, do anything you choose. Victoria took a step toward him. And if I choose to return to the ranch? Then you'd be welcome, Sam said, his voice rough with emotion. For as long as you wish to stay. And if what I wish is to stay permanently? Victoria pressed, taking another step closer. Not as your housekeeper, but as your partner in all things? Sam's breath caught audibly. Victoria, are you saying? I'm saying that I've come to care for you, Samuel Sullivan, she interrupted, courage carrying her forward. Despite the complications of how we met, despite the secrets between us. I believe in the man I've come to know these past months: honorable, kind, principled. Sam closed the distance between them in 2 strides, taking her hands in his. I love you, Victoria, he said simply, directly. I think I began falling in love with you that first day on the auction platform, when you held your head high despite everything. I've watched you rebuild your sense of self day by day at the ranch, and my admiration has only grown. He raised one hand to gently touch her cheek. But I need you to be certain. Your freedom is too precious to compromise for anything less than what you truly want. Victoria leaned into his touch, her heart racing. I am certain. These months with you have shown me what a true partnership can be built on: respect, kindness, and growing love. She smiled through sudden tears. I want to build something lasting with you, Sam. Something neither of us could create alone. Sam's face transformed with a joy she had never seen in him before. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss both tender and promising, a seal on the new future they were choosing together. When they parted, Sam rested his forehead against hers. We'll return to the ranch tomorrow and begin again, he murmured. No more secrets, no more shadows from the past. Victoria nodded, her heart too full for words. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, two people who had found in each other not just love, but the freedom to become their truest selves. Spring came early to Montana in 1879, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the softened earth. Victoria stood on the porch of the ranch house, their home now in every sense, watching Sam mend the corral fence with strong, sure movements that still made her heart quicken after months of marriage. They had wed in a small ceremony in Helena in January, with Margaret and Daniel Wilson as witnesses. The minister had raised no eyebrows at Victoria's status as a widow rather than a divorcee. In the territories, practical matters often superseded strict adherence to convention. Admiring the view? Sam called, catching her watching him. His smile held a warmth reserved only for her, the last of his habitual reserve having melted away in the intimacy of their shared life. Always, Victoria replied with a smile of her own, descending the porch steps to join him. The fence looks good. Will it hold that new bull you're bringing back from Helena? Should do, Sam affirmed, driving in a final nail. Midnight's got a temper, but he's exactly what we need to improve the herd. Victoria nodded, having learned much about cattle breeding in the months since their marriage. Sam had insisted she understand every aspect of the ranch's operations, teaching her with the same patience he showed breaking horses. I've finished the new curtains for the front room, she told him, linking her arm through his as they walked toward the house. And Margaret's letter came. She had the baby, a girl they've named Elizabeth. They'll bring her to visit when she's a bit stronger. Sam smiled at the news. Another little Wilson to spoil. Tommy will be a fine big brother. A familiar pang went through Victoria at the mention of children, though it was less sharp than it once had been. Sam had been true to his word that her inability to bear children did not diminish her in his eyes, and their life together was rich with other forms of creation and nurturing. Still, there were moments when she caught him watching Tommy Wilson with wistful eyes, or noticed how naturally he interacted with the children in town, and she wondered if he ever regretted his choice. You're thinking too hard again, Sam observed, pressing a kiss to her temple. I can practically hear the wheels turning.
Victoria laughed softly.
Just thinking about the Wilsons and their growing family. Tommy's getting so big, and now little Elizabeth. Understanding crossed Sam's features. Victoria, he said gently, stopping their walk to face her directly. Are you still worried about this? After all this time? She shrugged, unable to fully articulate the lingering doubt. Sometimes. I know what you've said, but nothing, Sam interrupted firmly. Yes, I like children. Yes, in some perfect world, we might have had our own. But this world isn't perfect, And what we have together is worth more to me than some hypothetical family that might have been. His hands came up to frame her face tenderly. You are my family, Victoria. You are enough. Tears pricked at her eyes as she leaned into his touch. And you are mine, she whispered, the simple truth of it washing away her momentary melancholy. They continued toward the house, the conversation shifting to plans for the coming week. Sam would be traveling to Helena to purchase the bowl and additional supplies, while Victoria would oversee the ranch in his absence. Oh, and don't forget Mrs. Abernathy is bringing her daughter by tomorrow, Victoria reminded him as they entered the cabin. Laura's still set on learning to ride, and her mother finally agreed if you'll provide suitable instruction. Sam nodded, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. The dun mare should do for her. Gentle enough for a beginner, but not so placid she won't learn proper control. Victoria smiled, enjoying as always his careful consideration of such matters. In the months since their marriage, word had spread about Sam's skill with horses, and several families in the area now brought their children to him for riding lessons. It provided a modest additional income and, more importantly, helped integrate them further into the community. That evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Sam reading aloud from a new novel while Victoria mended, a knock at the door startled them both. Visitors were uncommon after dark, especially with no prior warning. Sam set aside his book and rose to answer, one hand instinctively checking the position of the rifle mounted nearby. Victoria tensed, memories of Sheriff Harlow's late-night visit still fresh despite the months that had passed. When Sam opened the door, however, it wasn't the sheriff who stood on their porch, but a young woman little more than a girl, really clutching a small bundle and looking half-frozen in the cool spring night. Please, she said, her voice trembling with cold and fear. They said in town you might help. I've nowhere else to go. Sam exchanged a quick glance with Victoria, who was already on her feet, moving toward the door. Come in, child, Victoria urged, ushering the girl inside. You're freezing. In the lamplight, they could see their visitor more clearly, a slender girl of perhaps 16 or 17, with dark hair and frightened eyes. The bundle in her arms moved slightly, revealing itself to be an infant wrapped in a threadbare blanket. I'm Tessa, the girl said, her eyes darting between them nervously. This is Thomas. He's 2 months old. She swallowed hard. My husband, he was killed in a mining accident last month. The company took back our cabin. I've been walking for days. Victoria guided the girl to a chair by the fire while Sam poured a cup of coffee, adding extra sugar for energy. The baby whimpered softly, and Victoria felt an instinctive surge of protective concern. You're safe now, she assured Tessa, gently helping her unwrap the infant to check his condition. Both of you. The baby was small but appeared healthy, his face scrunching in displeasure at being disturbed. Victoria's heart melted at the sight of his tiny features, so perfect and vulnerable. How did you hear of us? Sam asked, his tone gentle despite the practical question. Tessa sipped the coffee gratefully before answering. In Miles City. I was asking at the general store if anyone knew of work for a woman with a baby. The shopkeeper's wife mentioned your ranch, said you and your wife were good people who might have use for an extra pair of hands. Victoria glanced at Sam, touched that they had apparently earned such a reputation in town. The same community that had once witnessed her humiliation now spoke of them with respect. We don't have much, Tessa continued anxiously, but I'm strong and willing to learn. I can cook and clean, and I learn quickly. Please, I'll work hard, I promise. Hush now, Victoria soothed, recognizing in the girl's desperate plea echoes of her own fear when she had first arrived at the ranch. You don't need to convince us. You and Thomas are welcome to stay tonight, and we'll sort out the rest in the morning. Relief washed over Tessa's face, and she seemed to sag with exhaustion now that the immediate crisis had passed. Victoria prepared a simple meal for her while Sam arranged a makeshift bed in the small room they had been using for storage. Later, after Tessa and her baby were settled for the night, Victoria found Sam standing at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky with a pensive expression. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her arm around his waist. "About how quickly life can change," he replied, drawing her close against his side. "One moment you're walking a familiar path, the next you're facing choices you never anticipated." Victoria nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "She reminds me of myself when I first came here, terrified, with no good options." "Except she has a child to protect as well," Sam observed, his voice softening. "That little boy deserves a chance at a decent life." Victoria studied her husband's profile in the dim light, recognizing the direction of his thoughts. "Are you suggesting what I think you are?" Sam turned to face her fully. "They need help more than just a meal and a bed for the night. We have room, resources," and he hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "And I've seen how you look at that baby, Victoria." Her heart quickened at his words. "Sam, are you saying we should take them in? Permanently?" "I'm saying we should consider it," he replied carefully. "Not as servants or charity cases, but as family, perhaps. If that's something you might want." Victoria's mind raced with possibilities she had long since forced herself not to contemplate. "The boy would need a father figure," she said slowly. "A man to teach him, guide him as he grows." "And a mother's love," Sam added softly. "Something I suspect you have in abundance, waiting to be given." Tears filled Victoria's eyes at the simple truth of his observation. Though she had come to terms with her inability to bear children, the maternal instinct had never diminished, only been carefully contained. "What about Tessa?" Victoria asked practically. "She's so young, barely more than a child herself." "We'd be taking on both of them," Sam acknowledged, "helping her grow into womanhood while she helps with the ranch. It wouldn't be easy." Victoria nodded, considering all the implications. "We should sleep on this decision," she said finally. "Make sure it's not just an emotional response to their situation." Sam agreed, and they retired to bed, though Victoria found sleep elusive as her mind filled with images of little Thomas growing up on the ranch, learning to ride with Sam, helping her in the garden, filling their quiet home with childish laughter. In the morning, Victoria woke to the unfamiliar sound of an infant's cry. For a disorienting moment, she thought she had dreamed the previous evening's events, but then reality settled in. She rose quickly, donning her robe to check on their guests. She found Tessa already up, trying to quiet the hungry baby while apologizing for the disruption. "I'm so sorry," the girl said anxiously. "He's usually not so loud." "Nonsense," Victoria assured her, taking the baby expertly into her arms. "He's hungry, and letting us know as he should. Why don't you wash up while I hold him? Then we'll see about breakfast for all of us." Tessa hesitated, clearly unused to such kindness, but her exhaustion won out, and she gratefully accepted Victoria's offer. While the girl freshened up, Victoria cradled little Thomas, marveling at his tiny perfection. "You're a handsome young man," she murmured to the infant, who had quieted somewhat in her experienced arms. Victoria had often helped care for neighbors' children in Boston and had a natural way with babies that seemed to come back to her instantly. Sam found them thus, when he returned from his morning chores, Victoria in her robe by the fire, speaking softly to the content infant while preparing a bottle of warmed milk. "You look right holding him," Sam observed quietly, his expression tender as he watched them. Victoria met his eyes over the baby's head, a silent understanding passing between them. They both knew that the decision had essentially been made the moment Tessa had appeared on their doorstep. When Tessa returned, looking marginally more rested, they sat down to breakfast together. The girl was clearly nervous, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for conditions to be placed on the kindness she was receiving. "Tessa," Victoria began gently, once they had eaten, "Sam and I have been talking about your situation." The girl tensed visibly, clutching her son closer. We'll leave today if we're imposing, she said quickly. I just needed one night of rest. That's not what Victoria meant, Sam assured her. Quite the opposite, in fact. Victoria reached across the table to touch the girl's hand reassuringly. We'd like to propose that you and Thomas stay here with us. Not temporarily, but as part of our household. Tessa's eyes widened in disbelief. Stay? But why would you? Because everyone deserves a chance at a decent life, Sam said simply. You, and your son included. We have plenty of room, Victoria continued. And while we'd expect you to help with the running of the ranch as you're able, you'd be treated as family, not as a servant. Thomas would have a safe place to grow up, with people who already care for him. Tears filled Tessa's eyes as she looked between them. You're serious? You would do this for us for strangers? We were all strangers once, Victoria said softly. Family is what we make it, not just what we're born into. Tessa looked down at her son, then back at the couple who were offering them salvation. I don't know what to say, except thank you. Thomas and I will work hard. We won't disappoint you. It's settled then, Sam said with a warm smile. Welcome to the Sullivan Ranch, Tessa and Thomas. The days that followed were filled with adjustments as they all adapted to their new arrangement. The storage room was transformed into a proper bedroom for Tessa and Thomas, with a crib Sam built himself from spare lumber. Victoria taught Tessa the routines of the household, while Sam began instructing her in the basics of ranch operations. To everyone's surprise, Tessa revealed a natural affinity for horses, approaching even the most temperamental animals with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her otherwise timid nature. She has the touch, Sam told Victoria one evening as they watched Tessa gentling a young filly in the corral. Could be a real asset with the training program I've been considering. Victoria nodded, bouncing little Thomas on her knee. The baby had thrived in the weeks since their arrival, putting on weight and becoming more alert and responsive each day. Victoria found herself falling hopelessly in love with his gummy smiles and curious eyes. She's still so nervous around us sometimes, Victoria observed, as if she's waiting for us to change our minds. Give her time, Sam advised. Trust comes hard when you've lost as much as she has. Victoria understood that truth all too well. It had taken her months to fully trust in Sam's goodness, to believe that their life together wasn't going to be snatched away like everything else she had valued. As spring deepened into summer, their unconventional family settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Tessa gradually relaxed, her confidence growing as she mastered new skills and found her place in the household. Thomas became a center of joy for all of them, his milestones celebrated as eagerly by Sam and Victoria as by his mother. The community's response to their arrangement was largely positive, though not without the occasional raised eyebrow or whispered speculation. Margaret Wilson, true to her supportive nature, made a point of visiting with baby Elizabeth, demonstrating her approval of the Sullivans' expanded household to anyone who might question it. You've done a wonderful thing, Margaret told Victoria privately during one such visit, as they watched Tessa and Tommy playing with the babies on a blanket in the shade. That girl would have had few decent options on her own. Victoria nodded, thinking of how easily Tessa's story could have mirrored her own, if not for Sam's intervention. We're the fortunate ones, she said truthfully. They've brought so much life to this place. Margaret studied her friend with knowing eyes. Motherhood suits you, Victoria. However it came about. The simple observation brought tears to Victoria's eyes. Though she had never carried a child in her womb, she had indeed become a mother figure to both Tessa and Thomas, guiding, nurturing, loving with a fullness of heart she had once feared would remain forever unexpressed. That evening, after Tessa and Thomas had retired to their room, Victoria found Sam on the porch, enjoying the cool night air after a hot summer day. She settled beside him on the bench he had built for exactly this purpose, her head finding its familiar resting place on his shoulder. Happy? He asked, his arm curling around her naturally. Completely, Victoria confirmed, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Are you? Sam's answer was to tilt her face up for a kiss that still sent warmth spreading through her body after months of marriage. More than I ever thought possible, he murmured against her lips. Victoria smiled, thinking of how far they had both come from that day in Miles City, he from a solitary man seeking justice for past wrongs, she from a woman whose value had been reduced to a price at auction. Did you ever imagine, that day you bid for me, that we would end up here? She asked, genuinely curious. With this life we've built. Sam considered the question seriously, as was his way. No, he admitted finally. I hope to help you, to do the right thing. But this, he gestured to encompass their home, their life together. This has exceeded every hope I might have had. Victoria nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. From the darkest moment of her life had come a happiness deeper and more meaningful than anything she had experienced before. I love you, Samuel Sullivan, she said simply, the words carrying all the gratitude and joy she felt for the man who had shown her what true partnership could be. And I love you, Victoria Sullivan, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Every day, more than the day before. As they sat together in the gathering twilight, Victoria reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them to this moment. Edgar's cruelty had led her to Sam's kindness. Her perceived flaw had led to a different kind of family than she had ever envisioned, but one no less rich in love and possibility. Sometimes, she thought, the deepest wounds could lead to the most profound healing, if one was fortunate enough to find the right hands to help with the mending. And as Sam's strong, gentle hand entwined with hers in the gathering darkness, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. Epilogue. 10 years later, the Sullivan Ranch spread out before them, transformed from the modest operation of a decade earlier into one of the most prosperous in the territory. New barns, expanded corrals, and a handsome 2-story house stood as testament to years of hard work and careful management. Victoria stood on the wide front porch, shading her eyes against the summer sun as she watched riders approaching in the distance. Even from afar, she recognized the straight-backed figure of her husband leading the group, flanked by a lanky youth on one side and a bright-eyed girl on the other. Their laughter carried on the breeze, weaving warmth into the afternoon air. As they drew closer, Victoria's heart swelled with pride, recalling the journey that had brought them here, from auction block to a bustling family ranch, their lives interwoven with love, resilience, and unexpected joys. The years had blessed her with a family she had once thought impossible, and the promise of a bright future lay ahead, rich with opportunity and boundless affection.